which is starting at 27. So it's chapter 23, verse 27, all the way
to 33, right?
yeah, up until 33. So last time we talked about the word which we often translate as atonement, Kippurim, Yom HaKippurim, which we often translate as atonement. We went back to the first usage of that word, which was in Mishpatim. And we found, first of all, that it itself was juxtaposed with the term with the term pidyon. So there's the word kofar and the word pidyon. And we found different translations: redemption, ransom, and atonement. All three of those could be used for the word kofar. A pidyon is ransom or redemption. That's how it's often used. Like if pidyon shvuyim, if you're redeeming or ransoming slaves, it's money that's paid in order to get somebody back.
Get your baby back.
Right. So last time we were, that's baby back ribs.
Yeah, there you
Sure,
go.
baby back ribs.
Oh, I
So
like
the baby back. So what were we talking about? Oh yeah, so on Yom Kippur, we were assuming that the notion would be something like your soul or your life, your vitality, because we're also talking about nefesh. What is nefesh? So we saw usage of that term that even with reference to fish. So nefesh chaya. So we saw that in reference to fish, we saw it in reference to land animals, and we saw it in reference to human beings. So again, if we're just looking at the text, trying to find meaning from the words and take direction from the words, it sounds like your life force, your vitality, your life force must be redeemed. So something has happened, and your life force is now being held hostage. And if you want to get it back, you have to redeem it or ransom. This is where we got to last time. I know we also talked about what we had. A couple options. One was that there was something that the Jewish people had done in the past that requires a kind of annual redemption or ransom of the soul. Without that redemption or ransom of the soul, the soul would be lost. Maybe the golden calf. We toyed with the idea that it might be eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but the problem there was that would apply to everybody. That wouldn't just apply to the Jewish people, and this is not a commandment for everybody to redeem their soul. This is a command for the Jewish people. And then I suggested there could be like a kind of hybrid where you would, and there are some who do, suggest that somehow there's a reiteration of the eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, a kind of reiteration of it that happens in the golden calf. They are not unrelated, but still it does seem to be something specifically connected to the Jewish people. And then there was a suggestion that maybe this is not about any event that happened, but just the assumption that even a life well lived is going to have events or actions that, if left unattended and unaccounted for, could result in us losing our lives. And so if that's the case, it's just an assumption that's being made by God about human nature, as it says in Ecclesiastes. I'm pretty sure it's Koheles. It says, Ein tzaddik ba'aretz, there is not a righteous person on earth, asher yasa tov, who does good, v'lo yechta, doesn't do some sin. And everybody does something. So perhaps it's that. We don't get enough information. There's an expectation that we have an oral tradition that's going to fill it in. But again, if you're looking at the text itself to see how much we can draw from the text, that's sort of where we left it last time, that you had all those different kind of options, and it seemed like it was talking about that. It does. Now, what are we doing? How do we pay? How do we ransom the life force? So here,
We afflict ourselves.
that seems to be how we're doing it. There seem to be, I'm going to say, two things that we do. The reason I'm going to suggest that we add the other one is because of the continuation, not doing creative work. In other words, resting, I think, is going to be a part of it too, because when it goes on to say, also it mentions an offering of fire made by the Lord, but it says, you shall do no work on that day, for it is a day of atonement. For whatever person shall not be afflicted on that day, he shall be cut off from his people. And whatever person does any work on that day, I will destroy amongst the people. So there seems to be two very important, again, there is some sacrificial element that's going to be important, and that's going to be elaborated on. It actually already has been elaborated on earlier. There's a very elaborate discussion of what happens in the Beit HaMikdash on that day, just briefly alluded to over here, but we've already had it in the Torah portion of Tav. They go through including everything the Kohen Gadol does, including the scapegoat, the identical goats and things. And so they are available for consideration also when we talk about redeeming our soul. But here, it focuses on two things, where it says that if you don't withhold creative activity, and if you don't afflict yourselves, that's when the punishments come in. So I'm going to suggest that these, therefore, seem to be the primary, because again, if we're interpreting this to mean that there's some kind of condition that already has your soul hostage, and you're now going to try to ransom it or redeem it, so then it seems like, again, one possible way of interpreting this is, if you don't ransom and redeem it, then a person's soul will be cut off, or they will be destroyed, because you need to ransom and redeem this. So therefore, you need to afflict yourselves, and you need to withhold from the creative work. There is that little line about the offerings, which does allow for a connection back to what they talked about the offerings. But it seems here like the real emphasis is on those two, on those two things. So what is the benefit? How am I redeeming myself through affliction? Like, what is affliction? What is the benefit of affliction? Why would it be considered a kind of redemption?
It's reminding us of how bad it can be if you don't afflict yourself. Well, afflicting yourself reminds you of what it's like when we're not behaving and we're in trouble. And we don't want to be in trouble, so we afflict ourselves to stay out of trouble.
Let's say somebody,
Something like that.
let's
I
say
didn't explain
somebody,
it well.
let's say somebody was driving in the back of he was riding in the back of a truck with a baseball bat. And he drove by your mailbox and he whacked it with a baseball bat. And now, when he's sober,
He redeems himself
he
by
knocked-
coming and paying for your mailbox.
yes, I would agree.
Yeah.
What if instead of paying for your mailbox, he stood outside and hit himself with the bat? Would you feel that he has redeemed himself?
No.
Isn't that what's happening here on Yom Kippur?
Seems,
If
Yeah.
the person is afflicting themselves and you're saying that's redemption, wouldn't that be, what if the guy just whacks himself on the back with the bat and he says, I hope you will take that in compensation for your mailbox?
some people would be happy with that.
It could be.
That's true.
Many mother-in-laws.
Yes. Any mother.
Um,
Yeah, so
Show in the eyes of the beholder. And the beholder.
all right, so why would, even though jokingly you were saying some people would
Accept it.
accept that, why?
Because
Even
they
though
like
it's a
seeing
joke,
him
why?
suffer.
Right, but why?
What's
It's
the word?
something like
art.
what Liz was saying.
Revenge.
I think that
For revenge.
you're feeling yourself. You're made to feel, you can't just go along like you usually do, eating, sleeping. You're made to feel something in yourself that's hurting. Kind of, I think that's what Liz was
Yes.
trying.
Yeah.
I might just like tweak that, which is that for many people, knowing that you recognize what happened is a huge part of it. There's the damage that you've done, but then on top of it, it's way more infuriating to people that you don't recognize that you've caused it.
Yes.
They have demonstrated that in many court cases, there is legal advice oftentimes given to employers not to apologize. Let's say there's not to talk to the employee or not to apologize if there's a lawsuit. There's like these, and there's like two sides to the discussion. On the one hand, there are many cases where the lawsuit might have been dropped if the person had just apologized.
Mhm.
On the other hand, apologizing is demonstration of guilt. So obviously they've done a survey and they have found that it's better not to apologize. In other words, there's less times when it's dropped and more times when it's used as proof or
Proof of
demonstration of guilt. And so therefore, the wise counsel is don't say anything. Don't talk to them. Don't say anything at all. But again, you hear about these cases where the person said, if they would have just apologized,
Yes. Yeah.
I would have dropped it. So there's this aspect when it comes to the kind of repair of a relationship after something's happened, that a very big part, it's not the whole thing, but a big part of what is required is a acknowledgement of the hurt,
Right.
empathy, and acknowledgement of the role that I played in hurting the other person. There's like non-apologies, apologies. Like the person will say, I've heard that my words that I spoke the other day have caused certain people harm. If that's the case, I'm very sorry, or something like that.
I didn't. do-
Right. This
I didn't mean to.
the reason it's
insane
called
on
a
anybody.
non-apology apology is because you're making a statement that you don't see it.
Yeah,
I
Right.
heard, right? That's why it's a non-apology apology. It's not sufficient to the person that you might have heard. It somehow satisfies the media for some reason. People will let you alone after a while if you say something like that, but the people that you actually hurt are not
no,
at all, because you haven't said that you realize, and the fact that you don't realize, you don't understand how you hurt the person's feelings, again, is an issue that in some people's minds rises to the level of the previous issue.
Yep.
So, and I want to read to you I'll read to you from two places. One of them is Megillas Esther. Why Megillas Esther? Why not?
Pretty appropriate right now.
It is. Today is Rosh Chodesh Adar,
yes,
the perfect time to be read from Megillas Esther. In Megillas Esther, famously does not overtly mention God,
that's right.
but there is one sort of religious moment. What would you say is the most religious moment? I mean, you could say, I'm going to say the most religious, most obviously religious moment in the book of Esther, where you'd have to admit, even a skeptic would have to admit that's a religious moment. What would you say?
What would you say, Lois?
I don't know. I'm thinking maybe
Thinking.
Esther says, if I die, I die. I don't know.
Oh, it's very close.
Close?
Very close.
Tell us.
Don't give us a
All right.
suspense.
Yes, tell
I will
us.
say
please.
there's two. One of them is when Esther. I'll say there's two. It's not just Esther. One is Mordecai, because Mordecai's response is he tore his clothing. This is in chapter 4, verse
Right.
1. He tore his clothing and wore sackcloth and ashes, and he cried out a great and bitter cry. And then the one that I think is even more so is Esther, when she says to Mordecai, she says, gather the Jews in Shushan and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days.
Right.
And I and my attendants will also fast. And then I will go into the king, not have being asked. And if I die, I die. So it is, if I die, I die. But the fact that she asked them to fast.
The fact that he went into mourning.
Rabbi, what also about Mordecai saying redemption will come from another source? Now, I don't know
Right.
what that. could
Right.
mean.
Yes, that could also be. This whole
Yeah,
this
that's
whole
a-
of part of the event. I agree. I'm open to widening the circle. but these now, there is no direct mention of God here.
No.
But they suggest that this is,
hovering around.
I mean, I think you'd have to be a real stubborn skeptic to think that there wasn't a pleading to God that was part of this process. Or that at least that the assumption that if we fast, that God will somehow help us.
Yeah, that if we afflict ourselves.
Right. So here's that thing. Now here she uses the word, she actually uses the word fast. She does not use the word to afflict. She does use the word, she uses the word fast.
Yeah.
Okay, but so that's Esther. And here's another interesting source, and this is from none other than Ahab. And I'm not referring to Captain Ahab.
I was going to ask.
But I am referring to what Rabbi Foreman says was the inspiration for Captain Ahab, and that is King Achav. So this is at the end of the first book of Kings. This is after Achav wants this vineyard of Navot. And Navot doesn't want to give it to him. So Jezebel says, let me take care of it. She has Navot killed, and Achav gets the vineyard. Achav's hanging out in the vineyard. He wants to turn it into a vegetable garden or something. He's hanging out there, and Eliyahu comes and reads him the final riot act of his life. He's had a few riot acts read to him, but this is really the summary of all riot acts. And basically he tells him, you're like layers of wicked, and you are going to end up, the dogs are going to lick up your blood at the river, and Jezebel's going to be, consumed by dogs, and everybody in your family is going to be wiped out. There's not going to be anybody, no male heir left from your family. And then it says, Vayehi kishmoa Achav es advarim ha'ela. So this is in chapter 21, verse 27. The first book of Kings only has, I think, 22 chapters. Again, the first book, it's all one book. Our tradition, if you see, it starts in the same story. There is no such thing as two books. It's only two books because
It's in two parts.
well, they broke it up because it was, a big book, so they broke it into two. So it says, "Vayhi kishmoa Achav es advarim ha'ela." When Achav heard these words, vayikra begadav, he tore his clothing. Vayosem sak al basaro vayatzon, and he placed sackcloth on his flesh, and he fasted. Vayishkav basak v'yahalech ot, and he even slept in sackcloth, and he walked, slowly like somebody who was in mourning. No discussion about God. But Vayihid var Hashem el Eliyahu, God spoke to Eliyahu, Hatishbi, Lamor, saying, Eliyahu the Tishbite, saying, Hara'isa ki nichnav Achav milafona. Did you see that Achav has humbled himself before me? Ya'an ki nichna miponai, since he humbled himself before me, lo avi hara b'yamav, I will not bring the bad during his days. B'yamei bno avi hara beisam, during his children's life I'll bring it, but not during his. So that's how God characterizes it. Ki nichna miponai. He humbled himself before me. And God considers that significant, even though he is layers of evil married to evil. And yet this, what the fasting and the wearing of sackcloth, and I guess walking sort of slow, the way he walked, his way of walking, what he's wearing, and his fasting, they are indications, even though it did not say the words that he's doing it before God, that's how God is interpreting it. And I will assume God knows what he's talking about. So I am suggesting that this could be a kind of window to the other times when it talks about fasting. In other words, in the text, it doesn't have to overtly say that you are fasting or putting on the sackcloth or whatever to God as part of your repentance to God. It's sort of going to be taken for granted that that's what's going on. And what you're demonstrating is humility. The actual term is nichna. He lowered himself. Here they translate it as humbles. Nichna. Just going to look here. This is, he humbles himself before me. But nichna, there's different words for humble. I want to see what they do in this JPS 1917 about it. So that's 22. 21.
I haven't told today.
No, Estelle has had trouble getting on, but also she was check in on it. There should be a wellness check at some point. Okay. Not Esther.
Rabbi, I'm going to ask, we certainly can make a connection between Ahab and Yom Kippur because we're talking about expiation of sin, perhaps, but we'll have to stretch it a little with Purim because they were doing it, yes, to call God's mercy, but not for the act of sinning, although we do say they did sin in, I mean, various ways. Going to
Are you answering your own question?
Yeah, but I don't think they were acknowledging that they were sinning at that point. They were just scared of
Thing is, what are you doing then?
just calling for God's mercy.
But how is fasting calling for God's mercy?
Right. No, I'm saying I see that, but I just don't see it as connecting to the sin part for Yom Kippur. Okay. I mean,
The only thing is, the other thing you have to, first of all, you have Midrash,
Right.
and you could see why they're going there, because this is an end, like you're saying, like it is in saying by Achov, there is some kind of suggestion that you're humbling yourself and you need to be humbling yourself before God. Maybe that's part of the support that the Midrash has to look for what have they done wrong.
right.
And that might be giving them direction to it. Also, you've got the Arizal who says that that Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. So you've got that Arizal to work with. But again, they both could be all working on that fast.
Mm-hmm.
The Medrash and the Arizal, besides the fact that there's the wordplay, but that fasting that she's doing, that's calling your attention to fasting and stuff like that. That could also be one of the breadcrumbs that leads the Arizal.
No,
Yeah.
The best thing is the telephone line to God when he sees you fast.
Yeah, but here, in other words, he is suggesting they use the word humble. I just want to see what it's here if he uses this. Yeah, they also say humbleth. I don't know my biblical Hebrew, that is for sure. Kaf nun ein doesn't work. Kaf nun ein a doesn't work. Kaf nun yud ein a doesn't work. All right, so we're just going to have to go with humble, but there's different words for humble. This is to humble oneself before. All right, so this is a stretch. This is a bit of a stretch because it's not like when this is what we did for Rosh Hashanah. For Rosh Hashanah, we widened our search because we didn't have because it's Rosh Hashanah it said Zichron Trua. And when we were searching for other Truas, we weren't successful just to get the word Trua because it was the first usage of the word Trua. So then we widened our search to anything with a shofar. And then we got
Lots of stuff.
Sinai and we got Akedas Yitzchak and other things. So I'm suggesting that this is a bit of a widening of the search because the word is afflict. And I'm assuming stuff like fasting, wearing sackcloth, lying on the ground, and walking slowly and things like that, they are examples of affliction.
So can I ask this? Is it possible that Yom Kippur is, in other words, God needs a day that the Jewish people walk humbly before him, afflict themselves, walk humbly before him. It doesn't so much have to do with whether they sin. I mean, it does, because it is redeeming something, but that there has to be a day that we look humble before God. That
Right, but it does seem to be connected to redeeming our soul.
yes.
Yeah, and so it's the redeeming our soul part. So the question is, why is our soul at risk in the first place?
Right.
Why? So I think the direction you were going in is maybe he's just holding our soul until we humbly and then he's returning it. But it seems like if he's holding our soul, there's something that caused that. I guess we could challenge that assumption, but
Maybe our soul is in his hands all the time. And every once in a while, we've got to remember that and keep it holy.
Yeah.
it's
It's
you-
the acknowledgement. It's just
grand-
like you said, it's the acknowledgement that we are humble. In other words, we're walking through life and maybe we're going to forget that our soul is in God's hands. However, this day, because he has such, punishments if you don't, you better
Right.
remember to be humble before me.
Right.
Right, but again, you'd have to. I
mean,
guess
he
you
could
could
just
say he's
slap
taking.
you at any time and take you.
You could say he's taking your soul in order to just impress upon us the gravity of the situation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you could say that.
Yeah. Do you know I'm holding your
You could
soul?
see how somebody would
Exactly.
go, and you could see how it is possible by trying to piece this together that you could understand that that you did something wrong and you need to work on it, and that at least here the part that is wanted is that you are taking the time to focus on this. You're not doing anything else,
Right.
and you're paying attention and you're humbly placing yourself before God. You could see, I get the option for the other one, I get it, but you could see how somebody would see from this that we're talking about you've done something wrong, I've done something wrong, and I need to humble myself before God as part of the redemption.
Well, that's certainly how the rabbis making Rosh Hashanah Yom Hadin. You're going to be judged then, and now you better.
Right. And that Yom Kippur becomes trying to repair what you've done wrong and atone for what you've done wrong, you could see that there are clues to that. You may not feel compelled to interpret it that way, but you could see how there are clues to that here.
Right.
I mean, we have come to associate the word atonement with that day because we translate that word as atonement, but that word doesn't have to be translated as atonement. That word could be translated as redemption or ransom. When we say atonement, it's
I
like
like that better.
suddenly all the notion of Yom Kippur plays itself out before us when you say that word. But that's not the usage of the word. I mean, I guess some people did say use the word atonement, even in the earlier one, to atone for it. But it seems more likely the translation over there is ransom or redemption.
Which connects this to what you were talking about Tuesday night, when
Yes.
we're asked, have you longed for redemption? In other words,
Yeah.
are
Yes.
you thinking of coming, right? Somehow that's connected there.
Yeah.
And that, if you understand it that way, it's part. You could see how how Yom Kippur always had to happen.
Yeah.
Because in other words, Yom Kippur had to happen whether there was a golden calf or there wasn't a golden calf. Yom Kippur had to happen by very fact of creation itself. But there's something about creation that already sets up this notion of
Yeah.
separation and redemption. And
Of return, yes, of
return of
exile and return.
right, of exile and return. And also the sort of stopping your creative work and your in other words, like stopping the creative work and humbling yourself, like you could see those as elements of this kind of grand redemption. And then you could see how people see when the Arizal is pointing to Purim, that's a big theme in the deepest aspects of Purim. Now, it's funny, there's ever since I've been reading this princess, the story of the lost princess, the story of the lost princess. So Esther, Esther is taken. She's taken. She doesn't get redeemed. She's like taken and she stays taken. It's like a rough thing. Many people, the mystics and the Hasidic Torah about Purim, it's about salvation. It's about redemption and salvation.
Mm-hmm.
The Gemara says that Purim also always has to be celebrated in the month that is closest to Pesach. Purim and Pesach are a similar notion. And Ramosha Shapiro, like every Purim, you would talk about that. Like the connection between Purim and Pesach, this redemptive thing, this notion of redemption. So that could be another thing that the Arizal is pointing to when he points to the connection between Yom Kippur and Purim, that they're both about redemption, and redemption of the soul and redemption of the people. Originally, it's the whole Jewish people that have to be redeemed,
Right.
as it were, in the Purim story. But Esther, the princess. All right.
You'll have to see how that